it's confirming what you already know, which is you cannot rationally talk somebody out of their view. And
Mhm.
that's why I think, where the detente mindset comes in is
Mhm.
part of that is letting go of the goal of I have to convince this person that they're wrong. I have to convince this person that they should look at things through a more balanced, more fair, whatever
Yeah.
perspective. It's a noble goal, but you can't get there through those normal means.
Mhm.
And for sure, you're right. There's some people you're not going to, there's some people you just cannot connect with.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's a blessing then that we don't have to have a relationship with everybody.
Welcome everyone to this episode of
Okay.
Your Lab Central. Hi, Thomas Becker. This is Thomas Becker with me, everyone. So, Thomas, would you like to tell us why we should be excited about this conversation?
Sure. I think your audience can be excited because everyone these days, at least, is struggling with the issue of identity
Mhm.
and the conflict that differences in social and personal identities often cause. So, yeah, I think getting into that has real implications not only for society and businesses and so on, but also for individuals and our ability to get along and to cooperate with other people towards mutual ends.
Now, identities in essence, right? They create differences in people, and there are different forms of identity that people have. They have their profession, relation, nation, religion. I don't know how many gender is there. Then there's sexual orientation these days. Then there's a lot many, right? They say, no,
Yeah.
I'm a cat owner. No, I'm a dog
Yeah.
owner. There's a difference in the identity there itself. So,
Yeah.
but what does this entail, right? The whole problem, right? It's us versus them. How can we solve this problem? How do we get started?
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. It is a matter of us versus them. There's an evolutionary basis for us categorizing ourselves into those who are for us and those who are against us. Probably in the days of hunter and gatherers, that was essential for survival. But today, it's causing us a great problem.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think it boils down to the fact that we tend to over categorize each other into all these boxes, some of which you just mentioned, in terms of race and religion and gender and sexual orientation. Um, and I think part of it is starting to think about those categories and identity in a very different way.
Okay. And now it's just that it's not as simple to say, right? It's not just us versus them. We have to change a mentality. The mindset change will basically solve our problems. Uh, there's just a lot many things happening due to this thing itself, right? We have our
Yeah.
identities, we associate with a group of people and we feel together with them. It creates the sense of community, right? And then this community is basically responsible for holding society together. So there are pluses and minuses, and then we also have to handle this diversity in itself. Uh, so, where do you draw the line? The community comes first, or is it the diversity that has to come 1st?
Well, I would propose that we think about it a little bit differently.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, my goal would not be to try to erase social identities or pretend like they don't exist.
Hmm.
Of course, people's views of who they are in terms of their background, religion, and all those other categories are relevant. To me, it's I are trying to truly understand each other. We're not going to get there
Hmm.
by focusing on the fact that, maybe you're from India, I'm from the United States, you have this religion, I have that religion. Sometimes when people have real differences, it's very subtle elements that can draw them together. For example, in the United States, you might have two people in the workplace. One is a Democrat, one is a Republican. And as you probably know, these days in the US, the polarization around politics is
Yeah.
extreme.
Hmm.
So those two people might have an initial even disliking for each other just based on their political beliefs. But let's say they do come to understand or know each other a little bit more, and they discover that they both like, let's say, the same kind of music,
Hmm.
whether that's, classical or jazz or for them to come together. And you don't get to that bridge by only categorizing people into those little boxes. So, what I'm trying to do in my book that is almost finished, ready to launch actually later this year or first next year, is to talk about two pathways to get to that bridge and to cross it.
Hmm. Now, this bridge that you're talking about, right? There is, I guess, would be some part about breaking these categories in some form, or at least diluting them so that people can get together, have a conversation at least. Because the lengths to which polarization has gone in several different countries, not just India and the USA, in several parts of the world, the polarization
Of
has become
course.
so extreme that people don't see eye to eye, they don't want to have a conversation, but then
Yeah.
the world runs on these conversations, right? Uh, how do you plan to bring these people together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think there's any country that doesn't have conflict based on some of these categories.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was on sabbatical in Germany a few years ago, and
Mhm.
you would think after World War II and the trouble it was caused by categorization, between Germans and Jews or Germans and German Jews or, any other number of categories, that in Germany that would have disappeared. We learned our lesson. But now there's conflict between Germans and people who are Turkish because they came over to help rebuild Germany. And in the mind of some Germans, they overstayed their welcome. I'm not picking on Germany. I think you can go to any country and find that us versus them. It's almost like we have to do that as humans, us versus them. So what I'm proposing is what I call a détente mindset, not the artificial erasing of differences in social identity, but the idea that despite those differences, we can have the goal, the shared goal of mutual coexistence,
Mhm.
right? And basically being able to sit with difference, whatever those differences may be, without falling into the trap of, because of those differences, you're my enemy, you know, automatically,
Mhm.
without any particular interaction. So that détente mindset is a way of looking at human beings in interaction where the goal is to not have you be convinced that I'm right and not pretend like I believe what you believe. That maintains the dignity and respect for both of us, right?
Mhm.
Um, and if we share that goal, that mindset, that détente mindset, then that to me is step one of getting to where we need to be. There's a second important step that maybe we can talk about in a minute or two.
Mhm. Now, okay, let's just get to the second important step before before I have a.
Sure.
There is one
Okay.
question I have, but let's just get to the second step before I
Sure.
get to that question. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say that you and I both have a détente mindset. We know there's differences. Some of those differences are very important to us, and maybe they're a potential source of friction
Hmm.
between us interpersonally. So having a détente mindset is a step in the right direction in that we agree, despite those differences, we want to coexist. We don't want to kill each other, or we don't want to classify each other as enemies, and so on. So the second major step is what I'm calling in the book whole person appreciation. Whole person appreciation. So that doesn't mean denying these social identities at all. Of course they're there. Of course they're important to some people. Of course they're important to track in some contexts, like in the US, if we're serious about diversity, being able to track certain categories is relevant. But whole person appreciation means going beyond
Hmm.
those categories to truly try to understand the person as an individual.
Hmm.
I don't. You and I just met very short while ago. Tell me something that's interesting to you in your life, a hobby or something that you enjoy doing.
Okay, I enjoy doing salsa these days. I just picked it up a couple of years ago, and yeah, I'm just enjoying dancing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So that's a piece of information, obviously, that I didn't have before. And
Hmm.
it's not really, you could create a social identity around anything, but to me, that's more of a personal kind of idiosyncratic fact about you.
Hmm.
That if our goal is to understand each other and we need to cooperate for some reason,
Hmm.
that's a potential bridge. And the more we know about each other, the more bridges there are, and the harder it is for me to stereotype you or you to stereotype me as, oh, that's just a white male, or that's just, that's a Hindu, or that's a Muslim, or that's somebody from the North, or that's somebody from the South, or that's a native German, or that's a Turkish person. And then all that baggage goes with it, and you never get to peeling back the layers of the individual. The onion metaphor, I think, is good here. You're peeling back the layers, trying to understand and get to know the person. And once you make certain progress along those lines, then I think, like you said, there's pros and cons. But I think that you become much more likely to have interactions that's beneficial.
Okay. Now, yeah, we've got to the part where people can get together, say, despite differences, right? Agree to
Yeah,
disagree kind of a situation. But there is
yeah,
always I don't know how to put it in a non-political way, but yeah, because there is always some community which is not willing to, not sit on the table to have a conversation, right? They're just there to create nuisance, or they believe in the sense of superiority that they have, and they're not willing to sit
yeah,
down and understand the other party, or just be there and live homogeneously, right? They want to create that heterogenic
yeah.
environment where they are separated out, or they're feared or something of that sort, right? How does one deal with this kind of situation? I mean, what do
Yeah.
you suggest there?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And it points to the fact that no approach is going to be a panacea. No approach is going to solve all the problems. Um, so if I think the important thing is to start with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Start with yourself in the sense of saying, I'm going to, my goal is to peacefully exist with somebody who holds very different views than I do. Maybe even somebody that I don't like personally. I don't have to be their best friend. I don't have to go dancing with them or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but so that's one thing. And the other thing is, um, that person you're talking about that you can find in all cultures who it seems just relishes conflict, who is looking for a fight, who's spoiling for disagreement. Um, if you if despite that you maintain a goal of, okay, I'm going to try to understand, if possible, why this person is the way they are. So you might have a brief conversation where you go, I can tell that you're really angry or upset about that. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Or maybe they've stated some view like, I just can't stand women in the workplace. Well, if you're like me, the initial reaction might be, well, I don't know what to do with you. You're a sexist. I'm not going to change your mind. But what if I am able to stay present with the idea of whole person appreciation and a detente mindset? The detente mindset means, okay, I'm not going to try to change this person. I'm not going to magically make them a non-sexist in the brief conversation. But maybe I can try to understand why they're angry
Mm-hmm.
about this and why it means so much to them. And I think you alluded to this in your question about a lot of times it boils down to something like fear
Mm-hmm.
or insecurity. Why is somebody arrogant? Where we define arrogance, let's say, as thinking that you're better than you are at
Mhm.
something. You're a better person. You're a better, I'm a better dancer. I'm a better intellectual, whatever
Yeah.
it might be. Well, why is that so important to me? And if it's possible to carry on the conversation with that individual without um, without prejudging them, with not accepting their views. Not all views are created equal. Not accepting their
Yeah.
views, but trying to understand more. I think that creates the possibility, uh, not the definite change, but the possibility of change on that person's part. Because the more you push back against that mentality, the more you push, the stronger that force field becomes,
Yeah.
and it's not going to crack. So yeah, it's a very difficult situation that you describe, and that person may never change. You cannot make them change. But by holding the detente mindset and having the aim of whole person appreciation, possibility of bridges with many more people, even creates space for mutual understanding and hopefully peaceful coexistence.
Okay, now talking about the different identities that people have had, right? There is one arena, obviously, when we are face to face, we have a specific set of identities. But on the internet, right? On the internet, people can take just any identity out of the world, right? I have a black clear. I have the screen covering protecting me from the internet, and yeah, now I can become a woman, or now I can become a child, and things like that. And now I can pretend to be anybody else, right? And I could do good things. I could do create nuisance. So how do you navigate this conundrum and navigate this anonymity over the internet?
Yeah, that's a super relevant question. I won't pretend to have all the answers,
Mm.
especially now that we have artificial intelligence where you can literally create a new identity
Yeah,
where somebody looks, sounds very different than who they are.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think so. The issue here, I think, boils down to I'm trying to look a certain way, I'm trying to generate a certain impression. Um, and you're right, that becomes part of their identity. So,
Mhm.
what does a detente mindset suggest there? Well, if you're going to have an interaction with that person, um, the goal of whole person appreciation then is to try to understand, first of all, who that person really is, if they're willing to divulge that, again, no
Yeah,
magic, if they're willing to divulge that, and even try to understand, okay, well, so why is that person doing that? Why do they want to look more popular than they really
yeah,
are? Why do they want to look more attractive than they really are? Why do they want to seem smarter or richer or whatever?
yeah.
And so, yeah, excuse me, that path won't take you everywhere, but it increases the probability that it's going to take you somewhere. And maybe that individual who's, because of their own insecurities, is trying to portray themselves as something better, smarter, faster, brighter than they really are. Maybe if they see that there is some self-acceptance I'm sorry, there's some acceptance on the part of you, you're not trying to judge them, or
Hmm.
you're not, just taking the darker path and coming down to a level where it's us versus them.
Hmm.
Maybe that person can feel safe enough to
Hmm.
develop some self-insight.
Now, since we talked about polarization, right? Now the internet, especially the platform X, has become a great way for people to have their own views, share it with the world, and then now X has been somewhat become the platform for politics. And yeah, there is a lot of content which is either side A or side B. It's very difficult to find something that is truly neutral, and people use it to basically just fuel the fire from both ends. Have you ever tried it? What are the downsides that you're seeing on social media?
Yeah, that's a really great question because um, it was about 2 years ago. I started doing, which social media was it? I actually forget if it was TikTok, or it wasn't X at the time, or it was a social media platform I hadn't been on before. I'm on LinkedIn and I deal with professional people all the time, for that purpose. But I thought it'll be interesting to get on where just normal people are talking about any issue that they want to. And oftentimes, like you said, it boiled down to issues that were very hot for
Hmm.
people, like their
Yeah.
religion, or in America, the issue of abortion,
Uh-huh.
or politics. And it was so extreme. The polarization was right there. And I think it was extreme for two reasons. One, the people who are inclined towards polarization jump on. The
Yeah.
people who are inclined not to, they just don't get involved, right?
Yeah.
So you end up with the polarized camps biting each other.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, of course, it's much easier to do those kinds of things on social media where you don't have to physically or intellectually defend yourself. So what I tried doing, and I have to say there was some degree of success without trying to,
Mhm.
uh, overinflate it, is I would start an interaction with somebody who had stated an extreme view, or at least a view that was very different than mine. And
Mhm.
I would just start with a rational, simple conversation in statement that might be different than mine. So I'll just make up an extreme example here. So let's say there's somebody who fervently believes in God, and specifically their religion. They're right, their God's right, everybody else is wrong.
Mhm.
So, just starting a conversation by saying, that's a interesting perspective. Can you talk a little bit about how you know that your religion is the right one? How you know your God is better than this God or no God at all? Just inviting them. And, the first reaction they have might be an attack on you. Oh, you sound like some leftist, whatever, they just go into a rant. But if you stay engaged and stay, you demonstrate whole person appreciation and a detente mindset. Like I'm not gonna run away from the conversation. You might, but I'm not gonna run away from it. But
Mhm.
I'm not gonna start name calling and denigrating you and all that. I think people not everybody, of course, but people tend to be more inclined to come around to saying, this seems to be a rational person, and maybe
Yeah.
that influences me to be at least a little more rational. If you're sitting there and responding rationally and even benevolently towards me, indicating a sincere interest to get to know me, it's hard for me to continue hurling invectives at you, you
Yeah.
know? I,
Yeah.
I could, but it just becomes harder over time when they start to see a little bit about who you are.
Mhm. Now, that's an interesting method that you said, right? Trying to rationally engage. But yeah, I still have that question as to just some people are just not inclined to having such a conversation. So yeah, that's probably a dead end that we get there. That
You're right.
if such a person exists, you just can't help it.
Yeah.
You have to let them be and
Uh,
leave them to their.
you can't change them. I would just say try not to elect them president or something.
I'd say we should not be going in that direction for this conversation,
I
but.
get you. I get you. But what I'm saying there is not necessarily um, a comment on my own politics. It's
Mm,
just that it's confirming what you already know, which is you cannot rationally talk somebody out of their view. And
mhm,
that's why I think, where the detente mindset comes in is
mm.
part of that is letting go of the goal of I have to convince this person that they're
Right.
wrong. I have to convince this person that they should look at things through a more balanced, more fair, whatever
Yeah.
perspective. It's a noble goal, but you can't get there through those normal means.
Hmm.
And for sure, you're right. There's some people you just cannot connect with.
Hmm.
So, you know, it's a blessing then that we don't have to have a relationship with everybody.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I mean, just letting go, I think there lies the whole problem, right? Some people are not able to let go of the fact that yeah, there are other people who can exist with their own opinions,
Yeah,
and yeah, we're not supposed to be imposing ourselves onto others all the time, right? Sometimes at
yeah,
the time, but not all the time. So yeah,
yeah,
with that, the acceptance that yeah, let them just be, that a specific community or a specific person just needs to be left alone with their own
yeah,
thoughts, because yeah, trying to engage with them will basically burn your own mind in some say.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. One way to think about it in a positive light is imagine that a mindset, positive or negative, can create kind of a contagion, an emotional or intellectual contagion
Yeah.
of a positive sort. And there's a continuum of people around you, some of whom are on the extreme, the person you're referring to, who, is beyond all, you know, not only help, but beyond conversation, beyond dialogue.
Hmm.
But short of that person, there's plenty of people who are not that extreme, who you can continue and through these methods, I think, have a better relationship with,
Hmm.
and at least have a coexistence with,
Hmm.
and hopefully work together in those areas where you can do so. Again, that example with Sadat and Begin back in Carter's administration, I think it's a good example because they didn't leave Camp David thinking, "Hey, I can't wait to go have a beer with this guy," or I hope we can
Yeah.
um, have a social relationship. That's not for everybody in every relationship, but it does build a bridge and make violent conflict, which is such a problem in my country and many others, of course, as well, less likely.
Hmm. Now let's talk about something that we might a lot of the audience might relate to, which is workplace, right? Now these days, diversity in the workplace is the thing, right? Having a diverse kind of workforce, different genders, the balanced gender workforce, people from different ethnicities to try to get all kinds of ideas into the workforce. But yeah, it comes with its own challenges because again,
Yes.
it's so many people under the same roof trying to work on a common goal, right? Any suggestions for somebody trying to create a team like that? How should they be tackling something like this?
Let me turn off that beeping. There we go. Yeah. Um, That's a very timely question. And I just posted a research article on my LinkedIn site uh, that described a project that discovered that, consistent with previous research, demographic diversity in and of itself on the part of individuals matter was the so-called inclusive practices that the organization had. I just want to check in. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah, now I can. There was some
Okay,
disturbance
okay,
in
just
the,
want to check in.
yeah.
Okay, okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that this research article that I posted was saying that it's not so much, that we have the right numbers of different kinds of people, but that we have practices within the organizations, policies and practices that demonstrate that we value diversity and we want to give everyone a seat at the table and we're going to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that doesn't mean favoritism. That doesn't mean, filling some kind of quota system.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's treating people with that same sort of uh, dignity
Yeah.
that doesn't guarantee them success, but gives them that opportunity. And I thought that was a great article because I think it reflects the idea of a whole person appreciation, which is even when it comes to workplace diversity, yeah, keeping track of some social categories might be relevant in some work contexts.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if we've got only white males in a certain department, we might want to take a look at that because unless there's some very clear reason that only white males are qualified to do that job, that could reflect something about our human resource management system or,
Mhm.
our own biases or whatever. Um, but those categories to me are a starting point. They're not the end point. And
Mhm.
I don't think you get to peace, well-being, and performance by overemphasizing those categories and underemphasizing the importance of getting to know your employees as individuals.
Yeah. Thanks for that. We've gone a long way from trying to understand what identities are to getting to a place where we can manage identities and then as well handling conflicts. Thank you so much, Thomas, for joining me in on this episode. Before we close, do you want to share any details where people can get in touch with you and learn more about you? And if they have any questions.
Oh, sure. Sure, just two comments. One is I'm on LinkedIn, so anybody can get on LinkedIn. Probably the easiest way is just to search for Thomas E. Becker, and that'll pull up my website. There's some other Thomas Beckers, but Thomas E. Becker goes right to me. The other is I have a website, Thomas at thomasebecker.com.
Mhm.
That website's going to launch very soon, and I do get emails there now. So that'll launch within the next week. In the meanwhile, I do get emails there. So that's Thomas at thomasebecker.com.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Now, thank you for joining me in on this episode of Your Lab Central. To the audience, if you liked what we talked about, do leave a like. If you have questions, you have something to add, or if you just want to say that you relate to what we talked about, do leave a comment. It's always open. And don't forget to subscribe before closing the window. Thomas, thank you for joining me in. I'm sure there will be a lot for the audience to take away with this episode. Thank you so much for joining.
I appreciate your having me on.
Thank you.